What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering. Some interesting news coming out of the UFC, Dana White, Joe Rogan kind of trifecta yesterday, as well as two more musicians come crawling back to Spotify after proudly touting that they were going to boycott the platform, to stick it to them for having Joe Rogan, whose, by the way, numbers were released and are shockingly large. The audience, I knew that Joe Rogan had a large audience, but it is insanely, it is much larger than expected. It is wild. So let's get right into the news. Of course, Dana White threatened to resign from the UFC in defense of Joe Rogan amid the 2022 controversy. We're going to get into this story after a super quick word from this video sponsor, Bloodlines. Huge shout out to this video sponsor, Private Internet Access. Look, in current year, everyone basically has to have a VPN. It's a extremely versatile and now basically required tool of browsing the modern internet. And that's why I'm happy to be partnered with Private Internet Access and have been for over a year now. It's a VPN I use, it's a VPN I recommend to my friends and family, and I have a massive discount for my viewers. In short, a VPN allows you to change the location that you may be seen as browsing the internet from. This helps you unlock television shows and movies that might not be available in your area. It allows you to browse the internet anonymously. Heck, even right now, we just saw several countries, for example, Google and Meta, are now blocking news in Canada. And, well, how are you going to get your news? Well, you could change your location. VPN helps protect your privacy, secure your data, and bypass network blocks. It comes in extremely important all the time. That's why I have it on my computers, laptops, and mobile phones. Private Internet Access is an open source app with no usage logs, unlimited bandwidth, high-speed global server network, dedicated apps, powerful encryption, and 24/7 live support. Unlock the power of the internet and stay censorship-free by using my link in the description below and get yourself Private Internet Access today at a massive discount. I'll give the game a try. It's free to play, and it supports the channel. Dana White threatened to resign from the UFC in defense of Joe Rogan amid 2022 controversies. Back in 2022, Rogan came under fire when a video surfaced compiling old episodes of his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, where Joe Rogan said the N-word several times. This, coupled with claims that Rogan promoted dangerous misinformation about the COOF, by asking questions on his podcast, put many companies in business with him, including the UFC, under pressure to part ways with Rogan. Now, what's interesting to me is I have a question about that. Under pressure by who? Right? Under pressure by who? That's just, I'm curious about under pressure. I mean, under pressure by who? Right? The government? Pharmaceutical companies? The lobbies? Who is telling the UFC to part ways? Ultimately, the whole incident blew over, but when there did seem to be a threat that Joe Rogan might lose his commentary job with the UFC, Dana White stepped in. Speaking on the Lex Friedman podcast this week, Friedman recounted a story to White on how he was on Rogan when Dana White called Rogan and told the comedian that he would resign if Rogan was ousted. Anybody who's with me, who's been with me, knows you're with me, White said. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. I'm not one of these guys that's going to roll over. It's like going through the COOF. I wasn't laying any of these people off. Some of these people have been with me for 20 years, and we're going to lay them off. The MFers will burn before I do that to my people. It's just none of this type of stuff is going to happen while I'm here. I can't say what's going to happen when I leave, but when I'm here, the people are with me that have been with me. They know exactly what's up, and Joe knows what's up. And again, it's a two-way street. Joe Rogan has been very loyal to me. I'm very loyal to Joe Rogan. Early on, nobody understood the game. Dana White said, Joe Rogan will walk you through what was happening literally before it would happen. He would tell you the setup, what was going to come next. He absolutely articulated perfectly. That's the impact Joe Rogan had on the UFC and continues to have in a sport that is immeasurable. He does make it easier to understand for the normies. And perhaps there's a reason. Now, of course, this article came out yesterday. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell both returned to Spotify after 2 years protests. Both Neil Young and Joni Mitchell have allowed their music to return to Spotify some 2 years after they pulled their entire catalog to protest quote-unquote disinformation, much of which, by the way, many of the questions that Joe Rogan was simply asking ended up being true or being correct. Neil Young was the first to leave Spotify in January 2022 over the information he didn't like. Neil Young posted a since-deleted letter to his management team and record label demanding that they remove his music from Spotify. I'm doing this because Spotify is spreading fake information about the jab, blah, 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 blah. I want you to let Spotify know immediately today that I want all my music off their platform, he continued. They can have Joe Rogan or they can have Neil Young, not both. Young was referencing to the steady stream of misinformation about the jab Rogan peddled on the Joe Rogan Experience. Last month, 270 doctors, physicians, and science educators signed an open letter asking Spotify to stop spreading Joe Rogan's dangerous questions. Apple Music responded by trolling Spotify, calling itself the home of Neil Young and promoting the artist's works. Joanie Mitchell then followed suit. I've decided to remove all my music from Spotify. Irresponsible people are spreading lies that are costing people's lives. No evidence of that. I stand in solidarity with Neil Young. Okay. Well, yes. True morals. It's so rare to see, especially in the music industry, true morals. I mean, you've got to, it's really, truly is impressive. You know, I'm impressed. Now, both artists have now returned. Rogan's podcast is no longer exclusive to Spotify, and Young said recently that he couldn't boycott all platforms. Well, why not? Just sell albums, man. I have a record player. I love playing records. What do you mean you couldn't? Isn't Neil Young worth like $100 million? He certainly could. He could allow his music to be exclusively streamed on his own website. Right? There's a million ways that he could make his music available without putting it on Spotify and YouTube and everywhere else. Engadget then reported that Joanie Mitchell has also returned, noting that one reason is that the jab disinformation was so important to both. Iconic singer Joanie Mitchell has put her music back on Spotify after more than 2 years after she left the platform in protest. Beyond the obvious reasons, Young and Mitchell had a personal stake in combating this misinformation. Both musicians had polio. What? So that's the same thing about that's the same as the Koof? That's a weird stretch. Then we saw just why. Now we know just why Spotify told these people to pound sand. Spotify finally reveals Joe Rogan's podcast numbers, and people are shocked. He has nearly 3 times as many listeners as TED Talks Daily. Never even listened to TED Talks Daily. Spotify has released audience figures after a redesign that features TikTok-style layout with podcast episode previews, which once clicked reveal podcast audience figures. It's been widely accepted that the Joe Rogan Experience must have been a huge audience, but now it's clear that he overshadows others and in fact has 3 times more listeners than the next most popular podcast, which is TED Talks Daily. The news has been shared on X, formerly known as Twitter, as one account posted, "It's generally accepted truth that Joe Rogan's podcast is the biggest on earth, but how massive is his audience?" Last month, Spotify quietly started testing a figure that discloses how many followers podcasts on the platform have. His show's almost 300% bigger than the next most popular show. Fans have been shocked at the sheer volume of listeners as Rogan reaches 14.5 million listeners. One fan posted on social media almost 10 million more followers than any other podcast. No one does it like Joe Rogan. And there you go. 10 million more listeners. Here's the list. Joe Rogan Experience, TED Talks Daily at 5, Call Her Daddy, which I don't know, it's some skank show, I think. Crime Junkie, which is, I assume, some sort of, crime podcast. Stuff You Should Know. Hey, shout out to Stuff You Should Know. I actually shot a video with them. That crew, I think, or it was Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. Maybe that same network. I don't know. You see Ben Shapiro has 847,000 listeners. So, maybe that's where people aren't watching him on YouTube as much. They're listening to him on Spotify. Theo Vaughn at 1.1 million. Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. Joe Rogan, 14.5 million. So 10 million more viewers than anyone. So do you think that, Spotify gave a damn about Neil Young or Joni Mitchell or anybody else. No, they never cared one bit, and now it's very obvious why. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like on it. Hope to see you tonight at 5:30 Eastern, either on thequartering.com, which directs to my Rumble page, or on YouTube, which my YouTube live stream channel is linked in the description below. We'll talk to you again real soon.